Have we broken the neck of inflation? Not yet. Are we in the process of breaking that neck? Yes. Now, we know, and I was on the market in Ljubljana a couple of days ago to check on prices because I come to Ljubljana on a regular basis if I can. Food prices are still growing at 2.4% on average in the euro area. And this is not the 2% that we want. We are clearly still above target, and it's one area, together with energy prices, to which consumers are highly sensitive, which has a bearing on what they do, whether they consume, whether they save, which matters a lot. So we are extremely attentive. We know that food prices in particular are very sensitive, and we know that we are not at target yet on that front. But are we breaking the neck of it? Yes, I think so. It's not broken completely yet, but we're getting there.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
You just listened to the President of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, speaking on efforts the bank has made to reduce inflation in Eurozone. In her words, break the neck of inflation. But she says there's still some way to go. The target by the bank is to bring inflation to 2.1%, but food inflation is still about 2.4%. That's some way to go, but they've been able to bring it from what it used to be. Price growth is slowed, but economic activity, production activity specifically in Eurozone is still low, and the bank has made an effort to boost that by cutting rates, which is the second back-to-back rate cutting that they've had in quite some time. And this is something that the banks seem to want to do more as they watch out for the inflation rate in the Eurozone. Joining virtually this morning as we look at the efforts of the European Central Bank at reducing inflation and encouraging economic activity around the Eurozone. We have Nweke, who is a global affairs analyst and he joins from Brussels in Belgium. Good morning, Nweke. Thank you for joining.
Sorry,
now, I didn't know if you were able to listen to the president of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, speak before we started the conversation. She talked about efforts being made, and in her words, they're breaking the neck of inflation. This is a region, not just a country. The European Central Bank has been managing inflation around the Eurozone, not just for a country. What's your thoughts regarding the efforts of the ECB so far at reducing inflation and even moving ahead to begin to cut rates?
Well, obviously, Christine Lagarde was very much upbeat, exuding optimism and all of that. And I must tell you that the market actually shares that optimism, but in a very, very cautious manner, because, she actually mentioned it herself. It is not yet Uhuru. There are still things to watch to ensure that they get to their target, which is, approximately, 2%. So, since 1999, I believe, when the, European Central Bank was founded, I believe this is, go back to 2022. About this time in 2022, in October, the inflation actually peaked, in the Eurozone at that time. And I think the rate at that time was about 10.6% year over year. That was massive. That it sent a whole lot of shivers everywhere. So this is what they have done now. Is indeed the highest inflation rate recorded since the creation, like I mentioned, of the Eurozone. So yes, it's pretty significant, optimistic, but very cautiously optimistic.
When we look at economic conditions across Europe, it's said to be deteriorating, and that has necessitated rate cuts. What could you say have been the reasons for deteriorating economic conditions across Europe?
Yeah, I think you can actually ascribe, the situation to multiple factors. I mean, it includes, for instance, the energy crisis, and you cannot divorce the energy crisis from the Ukraine-Russian conflict. And then you also have issues around supply chain disruptions, again, that is linked partly to the conflicts in the former Soviet Union, I mean Ukraine, Russia, and then you also think about the post-pandemic demand pressure, because I mean the pandemic is over, but the aftermath is still being felt, and so. These are bits and pieces of, combination of factors that actually led to it. And of course, it is no wonder that the, European Central Bank has had to respond, to, actually bring inflation back towards that target of, 2%.
Now, the ECB cut interest rates by 25 basis points. Now, people were expecting that there should have been a more aggressive rate cut, but the ECB president says for now, they feel it is okay to leave it at that. Do you think it's enough to have left it at that? And going forward, they still have 4 meetings in the year. What are your expectations? What do you think is going to be the direction of the ECB regarding rate cuts?
Well, like I did mention, I think there has been a need for them to cut, but not too deeply. Okay. And that is actually aimed at forestalling, a serious shock to the economy. Yes, I believe that the first major step has been taken towards breaking the neck of inflation. He didn't say the neck has been broken, but one can expect, steady, cut in the coming periods, leading up to a major meeting. I believe they will be having next month, as a matter of fact, just a few weeks from now, sometime in November. And I think major announcement is expected out of the November policy meeting.
There are countries in Europe that are said to be like the production hub in Europe. In those areas, with the cuts in rates, what do you see happening in those areas, particularly in countries like Germany? Do you see production picking up, or it will take more cuts to have that effect?
The modest cuts in the first instance will already deliver some fruits, because don't forget, Blessing, that the major worry is high unemployment. Okay, now that is also linked to production, because distortion in production activities will be occasioned, of course, by high unemployment. So building on the modest policy change that has occurred, I believe that the goal of stabilizing, bringing in stability to the Eurozone economy will definitely be achieved. But indeed, more is expected, and that is perhaps the singular reason to expect that more announcements will be made out of the policy meeting in November. Yes, Germany, as one of the major economies in Europe, is very much concerned. Now, production activities have improved indeed, but more still needs to be done, and I think the optimism that is being expressed is indeed justified, but only if the consistency is maintained.
Now, for the month of September, when the Eurozone looked at the survey that was done and looked at the report before it went on to cut rates, there were, among the Euro states, Ireland had the lowest inflation rate. What could you deduce that to?
Well, first and foremost, I believe that the major anchor for Irish, beautiful number has to do with sound, economic policies. That's one. Now, linked to that is the fact that, the tech industry in Ireland has actually gotten a very serious boost in the last decade and incrementally. Now, I think it is now and going forward that the impact of those boosts that it got through policy, very intentional policies, it is now that the fruit is being reaped. I mean, all the global tech industries actually have a hub. I would say, the vast majority of them have a hub in Ireland, and I think, without going left, right, and center, one can actually see from that area, that economic area, why the rate is the lowest in Ireland.
You said that the investors and the financial markets are still a bit watchful even when rate has been cut. How do you think the rate cut by the ECB will impact the financial markets?
Well, there are obvious ways that it will impact the financial market, because obviously one could see that post the pandemic, the major worries was lower activity and massive retrenchment. Now, signs of that actually became strong, and indeed in some jurisdiction within the Eurozone, we saw that already beginning to happen. But then, due to government intervention, where rather than having people out of work, government preferred that subsidies are paid to to employers to keep those workers within, so that there is no vacuum created in the labor market. Now, I believe that such worries, even though they have been managed very well, they have not, those fears, those concerns have not, gone away completely. So if there's anything that worries the government, but also the private sector, it is that, issue of massive, unemployment, because don't forget, the production that we talked about will also be massively, affected by it, but also the purchasing power of, the citizens. So those are the areas that are still of huge concern, because of the impact it will have, not just on the economy, but also on the overall, social sphere.
So the ECB is employing the approach of inflation targeting, which seems to be working very well for them. What are the lessons for a country like Nigeria to learn from the European Central Bank?
Well, I think policy consistency is very, very important. That's number one. Number two, these policies are no standalone. I mean, they are based on data. Okay, so that is why you see that a lot of money is actually put aside for R&D, research and development. And the academia are also, brought in to ensure that, accurate data are provided. Now, Nigeria needs to invest in all of, as basic as it is, Nigeria has to realize that, such accurate data gathering that then leads to, very sound policies are very, very important. So it's a matter of, putting your money where your mouth is. And that's what the European Central Bank has done. And I think Nigeria can learn a lot from that.
Let's get to Germany again, with production activity reducing, and then the interest rate has been caused to encourage more borrowing and investment. What should the world be looking at or expecting to come from countries like Germany, which are the production hub of Euro, in the coming months?
Well, I think it is still early to predict that, Germany will return now. In the coming months to its pre-pandemic, economic, situation, economic strength. No, there are still a lot of work to do, and let's not forget also that, due to some of the European Central Bank policies that actually strengthened the euro, export, became challenging because the euro was so strong that, other countries were finding it difficult to deal with euro. So, which is part of the downside of a strong, currency. Now, in the coming period, with the stability that has been introduced into the market due to, the steps taken by European Central Bank, economies like Germany will be drawing, I would, estimate, in terms of taking over the deficit created by, the pandemic. I think they will still have about 25% to go in terms of, normalizing the economic situation.
If we look at how the ECB has waded into the economic challenges in Europe, if we look at Africa, which is a region as well, we don't really have a central authority to look at when we talk of managing the economic challenges within the region. Why do we have this difference?
Well, a very important point you've raised there, Blessing. Theoretically, they do have that. I mean, in the regional bloc of ECOWAS, for instance, the African Union, they do have those in theory, but in practice, it is just not there. I mean, if the largest economy in Africa, which is Nigeria, is not getting it right in terms of, voting out the necessary budget to drive R&D, research and development, I mean, you cannot expect so very much from the rest of Africa. So you see the recommendation for Nigeria, to be more purposeful in actually doing the groundwork, to kind of come closer to the level that the European Central Bank has done. The African Development Bank is doing quite a lot, but they are just not there and not yet. And I believe that more support could be used.
Looking further into the activities of the Eurozone, one of the things that they do I'm talking about the ECB rather, one of the roles that they perform for the Eurozone is managing foreign exchange reserves. They also supervise banks. But in Africa, you find that every country has its central bank and they are sovereign in attending to the issues of their country. What sort of policy? You mentioned regional blocs like the ECOWAS, but we've also seen the challenge that the ECOWAS have suffered in recent times with the political issues. concerning other ECOWAS countries, the 3 countries that pulled out of the ECOWAS, forming the Sahel states recently, that also weakening the power of the ECOWAS. Now, if Africa is to copy the model of the Eurozone, using a single central bank as an authority to supervise all the central banks within the region, what sort of policy, what should be the mode to achieving this? And would it work here?
It will work anywhere. It will work everywhere. But the thing is that you've got to get the fundamentals right. And the fundamentals here is that where there is no, political stability, where, you have crisis and, threats of war here and there, of course, it is difficult, nearly impossible to plan. And when you see Europe actually coming out in full force to support Ukraine against the aggression of Russia, it is also partly, for the reason that you've just raised, Blessing, which is ensuring that the stability, the political stability that is needed to drive economic growth is not disrupted, it's not distorted. So in Africa, some of these things don't, are not stand alone. So first you need to deal with the fundamentals, which is political, stability, because it is only in that environment, in that atmosphere, that any policy that, a central bank for Africa, African Central Bank, could work. So that's a good place to start. And indeed, it will work if a measure of stability is achieved.
Now, if we're to go back again to what the ECB president said, Christine Lagarde, she mentioned that the zone has sort of achieved a soft landing. However, she did acknowledge some risk, which could come from geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. Could you take us through how that could jeopardize the gains achieved by the Eurozone?
Well, obviously, Lagarde's statement was, most likely intended to assure markets and the public that, the ECB's action are effective, but caution remains, a necessity. It remains a necessity because, prematurely signaling an end to rate highs could encourage, complacency. And as you know, Blessing, complacency in a market introduces a whole lot of, ill winds, particularly among consumers. And, it's got to be balanced. So that communication in itself was meant to reassure the market. But then we also have to bear in mind the worries that that you raised, and that is why they realized, like under Lagarde's leadership, that this is work in progress, and it is not yet over.
If we look at what's going on in the Middle East, there are countries that have been able to manage, countries in the Middle East have been able to stay out of the geopolitical issues within that region. But if we look at how that could affect supply chain, what else, what specifically could be the disruption from that region? Does it have to do specifically with energy, or are there other supply issues that could come from the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East?
Absolutely. Energy, I believe, is actually the least of their worries. I believe that the major disruption, the major concern that the Eurozone countries experienced was the tension in Ukraine-Russia conflict. And I think that is the worst that can hit them. Now, as far as the Middle East is concerned, I believe that agricultural supply in terms of fruits and all of that, is actually a major source, a major commodity, as I can put it, that they are very much concerned of experiencing some supply chain disruption. You can also see that the tone that European countries are singing now is actually different compared to the sort of all-out support that was given to Netanyahu at the beginning of the conflict. They probably didn't envisage that it would drag on for this long. They probably wanted to actually kind of build goodwill with Netanyahu as a basis to now appeal for de-escalation and all of that. So yes, it is not for nothing that they are doing everything they can to create a kind of balance and end the war as quickly as possible, because yes, agricultural products, things as easy as tomato, grapes, and so on and so forth, coming heavily from that region, will suffer serious disruption.
The Eurozone is one of the most developed regions in the world. If we look at how developed regions of the world have handled external shock, again, let's look at Africa and the impact of supply chain disruptions. What can't be learned?
Well, what has been learned is that early intervention is very important. Now, if you compare the European Central Bank with, for instance, the Fed, the Federal Reserve of the United States, which is the U.S. Central Bank, the Bank of England, or the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan was least because they actually intervened before others. But for the other two, the European Central Bank, reacted a bit later. Now, I think the justification for that, like Lagarde told us, was that Europeans typically could be compared with, diesel engine. It starts slowly, but once it picks up, it becomes turbo in terms of how it runs. So the lesson to learn from there is that reacting too quickly might not be the best option, but you need to watch the indicators. And in terms of the European Central Bank, there were 7 main indicators that they had to watch very, very closely. If we have enough time, I could delve deeper into that. And once they were assured that the right thing to do was the rate cut, they went in, and like I mentioned earlier, we are set to see steady, consistent action. The next announcement is expected in a few weeks' time, and then continuing that. So being diligent, being meticulous is part of the lesson. And again, Blessing, I come back to the point of investing in research and development.
Now you've touched on research and developments. According to Christine Lagarde, she says that further actions regarding rate cuts and inflation targeting would be data dependent. Why data? How important is this in monitoring inflation and also fighting it?
Yeah. Data is so very important because, Lagarde mentioned herself, this was a data-driven operation, and the key data points, to support her optimism, are the fact that the inflation was brought down, series of interest rate high, and it included, for instance, headline inflation rates, core inflation, wet growth mediation, and reduced consumer demand. Now, energy price stability, this, and then credit slowdown. These are all the data points that were taken into consideration and studied very, very carefully, getting the best European, data analysts to see what the data is telling us in all of these five, data points that I have mentioned, and then on the basis of that, draw up a policy.
Let's take a look at what the Central Bank of Nigeria has been doing to fight inflation. Now, we've seen that for most of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting held this year, the Central Bank has steadily increased rates as opposed to what the ECB is currently doing. Now, currently, the rate stands at about 27.25%. If we're to go the route of using data, does it suggest that sufficient data is being used to arrive at decision made by the Central Bank of Nigeria?
It is doubtful that it is. And the reason it is doubtful is that if it was, the impact would have been felt. I don't know if it was you or, in one of the clips played, that comparison was made with, the cost of a bag of rice, and how high it had gotten, with Christmas approaching and all of us knowing how much, rice is critical to Christmas celebration. Now, they had decided to go the route of, palliatives. That's not, the data doesn't tell you that palliative is what you use in, sorting out inflationary trend in a sustainable manner. So it's either the data are faulty or they are not using any data at all. That is, the most important conclusion to draw out of, the vacuum that is between policy actions taken and the reality that people experience on the ground.
Using inflation targeting approach, the CBN governor sometime in the year did say that the target of the Central Bank of Nigeria is to bring inflation at about 21%. But from what was released by the released by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) for the month of September, inflation stood at over 32%. Is inflation targeting working here? Are there certain factors that should be mixed together to ensure that inflation targeting does work in Nigeria?
Yes, indeed. There are, a lot of, a number. I would think, off the cuff of my head, I could think of, 5, maybe 7 indicators to look at. Now, those factors, those elements, they don't just come on their own. What the market is saying are included in the data. Now, if you don't have the accurate data, for instance, what the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is telling us is different from what the Central Bank of Nigeria is saying. Now, you ask yourself the critical question: on what data is the CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, on what data are they basing their policies? So, yeah, I think that disconnect is a major issue and needs to be addressed if the forecast and the prognosis that the central bank is making is anything to go by.
The value of the euro is still very high, regardless of the inflation that the zone has experienced recently. Now, with the rate cut, what do you think the impact would be on the value of the euro?
Well, I think the goal is stability because, like I mentioned earlier, the euro being very high also has its downside in terms of how much it impacts exports. For import, it's not a problem, but you see, there has to be a healthy balance between import and export. And so that is also linked with production because when production is high, you produce more. Taking Germany, for instance, the propensity, of course, to export because you are not just producing for the local economy, for the local market, you are producing for export. Now, in a situation where the euro is way too strong, that impacts, negatively on export because people hesitate to buy. So there has to be, that stability, and indeed that is, part of the reasons that, in 1999 the European Central Bank was established.
Now let's look at what countries like Japan or some other Asian countries have done regarding the value of their currency vis-a-vis trying to be more export-oriented. You mentioned that there are downsides to having a strong value euro when it comes to production or when it has to do with production activities within the euro. Can there be some deliberate attempt at tampering with that to encourage more exports of goods from euro?
Absolutely, absolutely. And linked to that, Blessing, is the issue of production. So you see, none of these things, is a standalone. When they produce more, of course, they are producing for the export market. And like I mentioned earlier, yes, it makes sense then to ensure that your currency is not, for want of a better word, overpriced, such that affordability of your currency for the export market, those who are importing the eurozone products, that you don't play them out of the game. And so there is a delicate balance here to strike, and I believe that that is ultimately the goal of the European Central Bank, and more actions, more announcements are expected in November and going forward in that regard.
There is also the European Union and there is the European Central Bank. How have these two institutions been able to separate their functions, that while one is really about the economic growth or monitoring the economy of the zone, the other tends to be political? What can African region copy from that?
Well, what the African regions can copy from that is, for instance, for a start, respecting the sovereignty of the independence, rather, of the central banks, okay? Because the central bank is neither an appendage of the, presidency of any country, neither is it, an appendage of the Ministry of Finance, but there can be a symbiotic relationship between all of these quasi-independent entities. At the end of the day, Blessing, the president calls the shot. And in a situation where, there is, mutual collaboration and all of that, yes, of course, they can have an interministerial kind of structure where a platform or a tool that is used to, ensure harmonization so that they all can be singing from the same hymn book. But, a situation where, the central bank, becomes, an extension of the office of the presidency as we have it in most African countries, there are issues there. And, that has got to be addressed.
The African Union has been working to establish the African Central Bank and the African Monetary Fund, but these institutions are still in their development stage. What can be done to quicken the operations of these institutions?
Blessing, I do not know that they need to, quicken the operationalization of, these institutions. What I do know and strongly recommend is that they get the, fundamentals right. Because ultimately, Blessing, the question you ask yourself is, are the individual economies of these African countries, their fiscal policies, but also the economic policies, are they sound enough to be able to, be part of, an African Central Bank or African Monetary Fund? The obvious answer to that is no, they are not. But that doesn't mean the end to the project. What it means is that very clear criteria have got to be, pushed out, and countries, African countries, given time to comply before they can put a target, say that when they have about 70% complying, they can make a start with that. And the other 30%, as they comply, they can have a kind of association relationship with them, not full members. But when they now, become compliant, they can join. So these are the sort of things to look at and actually make sure you get it right than, speeding the process and ending up having just an institution that is not fit for purpose.
What is the relevance of a stable Eurozone to global economy?
Europe, Eurozone as a zone, as a bloc, and the European Union, represent a very, very significant, percentage of the global economy, both in terms of export, both in terms of trade and politically as well. So I think it is in the best interest of the world that, European institutions, European economy are stable. And it is no surprise then that the rest of the world, United States of America, England, even though they have, gone out of the EU, that it is important to them that they maintain, a good, an excellent, as a matter of fact, working relationship with Europe. And I can see less of that. Instead, we're set to see more and more of such, solidifying of their relationship because of its importance to the global economy.
Thank you so much. I asked this question because someone watching might just be wondering why talk so much about the Eurozone. How does that benefit people in Africa? How does that benefit people in other regions of the world? Here, you've gotten the answer to that. That's the word. After all, is a global village. What affects one part of the world will have some effect on other parts of the world. Many thanks, Nweke, who is a global affairs analyst. Thank you for looking at the efforts of the European Central Bank at tackling inflation, highlighting the lessons that Africa, especially Nigeria, could learn from that.
Always a pleasure to join you, Blessing. Thank you for having me.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.